Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back. Thanks for being here. And we got 5 minutes till class time, so just getting things the stream established a little early. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Hey, Sebastian. Good to see you there. Hi, Nigel. What's up? Just a couple of us for now, but we still have a few minutes, so. Hey, Zoe. Welcome to class. Just a couple more minutes here, and then we'll be good to go. Hey, Kylie. Hi, Olga. Welcome back, guys. Hey, Claire. Okay. About a minute to go. Hi, Sydney. Welcome back. Good to see you there. Hi, Cordy, Kenna, Lane. Awesome. Good to see everybody. Hello, Angel and Ben. Rise and shine. Good morning. Okay, guys. Well, it's now, and hi, Simon. It's now pretty much 10, so I'm going to get us underway. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up and being at the meeting. I always appreciate your attendance. And let's see, today's Wednesday, so happy Wednesday. It's hump day, I guess they say. So let's get over this hump and get to the second half of the week. First of all, sorry last time that there was a short outage for the last 10 minutes or so of the class period. I hope that many of you guys were able to notice the Canvas messages that I sent out, in which, well, the second one especially, because I attached videos from the Monday meeting So I attached our video, which cuts off right at about the 42-minute mark, and then the same lecture that I delivered the previous hour to my 9 a.m. Group. And from there, you could have caught the notes, at least in the previous video, for the last 10 minutes of the meeting. That's a very rare thing that the actual feed would cut. I mean, I've done literally hundreds and hundreds of these meetings, and I think it's the only time that I was not able to reestablish the connection. But we'll just be monitoring that. I don't think we're going to have any issues. If there are, I have backup plans ready to go. So anyway, guys, thanks again for being here. So let me just bring you guys back into the meeting, and let's kind of catch up as much as we can. We're working through the first unit of the course, which is philosophy of religion, and all these different arguments concerning the existence of God and the different criticisms and objections to those. Oh, and by the way, I think I've said this before, but do go ahead and comment in the chat if you haven't yet, and that's my informal attendance record that I keep. So yeah, just as usual, say hello or good morning. Okay, thank you. And then, so back to the review. We've been looking at philosophy of religion. The first big argument we studied was the ontological argument, and so you guys know all about it by now. That's the one that says God's definition is greatest conceivable being, and basically it's greater to exist in the reality and the mind than just the mind by itself. So given this definition, God has to exist in both because that's greater, and if he didn't, then he wouldn't be the greatest thing you could conceive of, which would contradict the definition. Then there were the trio of objections. Gaunilo, you can't prove that there's something that exists just by having the idea of the greatest conceivable thing. If you could, then I could prove the existence of this island, but we know that that's absurd, so that's a problem for Anselm. Moore says that existence is not a predicate, and he uses the growls versus exists comparative to make his point. And then you had William Rowe, who said that you cannot prove something exists just by defining it as existing. If you could, then I could make up words for things that don't exist or maybe could not exist, and then establish or purport to establish that they must be real, like unican. Even if I say it means existing unicorn, clearly there are no existing unicorns, regardless of whether this is a word that has that as a definition. Okay, and then we began with the cosmological argument. So now I'm going to try and bring us back through that argument. First of all, and I think this is kind of where we got cut off, there's this example in the beginning of a person who encounters a sphere in the woods, right? Someone sees a sphere, that's something unusual to see in the woods, you know, a sphere of about your same height, just standing there. So here's a takeaway, basically, that if you saw such a thing, what do you believe would be a normal reaction to that, having seen an odd sight like a sphere in the woods? Just what do you think would be your hot take if you saw that in reality? Even if it was just a momentary passing thought, I'm sure that you'd have a thought like what? Upon seeing the sphere. Let me know. Let's hear in the chat what you think would be a common type of reaction that any ordinary person might have. Surprised, confused, good. Surprised and confused, why? Because it's not normal to see it there. And so part of your confusion, surprise, we could describe it as curiosity. Kylie, I don't know about fear. It's not like we're saying this is an alien invasion or something. It's just like a plastic beach ball, you know, sitting there that's, you know, clear and transparent. But it's something weird for it to be there. It's not a natural object in the woods as a setting. So you can ask questions, good, Sydney, like, what's it doing there? Why did it get there? And so he points out, the author Richard Taylor, that such an experience as that would lead you to have these curious questions, like what is the origin of that? How did that get here? What's the ultimate backstory that led to it being here in the woods? Now, he next mentions this, that you would ask that question perhaps because of how weird it is to see it in that unusual place. When you see things that are in their everyday commonplace, you don't usually have the same kind of curious questions or thoughts. So like, I don't know, when you walk into, I mean, we're not walking into many buildings at all, but if you walk into a classroom, for example, remember that back in the day, and you walk in and you see desks, I'm sure you don't look at the desk when you walk in the room and say, whoa, how'd that desk get there? What's it doing there? What's its ultimate origin? But, and here's a point he really wants to be clear about, even though we're not in the habit of asking these origin type questions of everyday common things that are not in an unusual place, couldn't we still ask those questions if we really wanted to? You know, if we wanted to kind of think about the ultimate origins of things, then we could ask this question about the odd, unusual sphere, but we could also ask it about any ordinary thing too, right? If you walked into an art gallery and you saw a big sphere, like in one of the rooms, that you might say doesn't lead to the same curious thoughts because you expect to see such a thing in maybe like a contemporary art museum. Seeing it in the woods is weird though. But the point here is that whether it's in a weird area or in an area where you would have expected it, can you still ask the same question, how did it get there? Definitely. I hope that that resonates with you. Here's one more example. You see that I'm seated at a little desk. This desk, I bought it at Living Spaces, a furniture store. And I don't usually sit back and ponder, where did it come from? How did it get to my house? But, you follow me? I could ask that question if I really wanted to, and I could think about it. Even if I don't know the ultimate answer, I could question where it came from, how it began. You know, it must have come from some kind of factory where they assembled the parts and then eventually shipped them out to retail locations where I bought it. But here's our takeaway again, guys. The sphere is just sort of a lead-in example, but then it generalizes to all these other cases. He uses an unusual example because he says that's what would really trigger curiosity for an ordinary person. But then he says to us that even if we're not in the habit of being so curious about regular stuff, that we could supply the same kind of questions about them too. And of course, there would have to be an answer, even if we're not presently aware of the answer, because everything that exists has to have a cause. So let me read that, and you can see his statement about it. He says it here on, page 25. So he said, suppose you were strolling in the woods, and in addition to the sticks and stones and other litter of the forest floor, you came upon some quite unusual object like you'd never seen before and you would not expect to find in that place. Suppose, for example, that it is a large ball about your own height, perfectly smooth and translucent. You would deem this puzzling and mysterious, certainly. And now here's the second part I was mentioning. But if you think about it, it is no more inherently mysterious that such a thing should exist than that anything else should exist. If you were quite used to finding such objects of various sizes around you most of the time, but you had never seen a regular rock, then upon finding a large rock in the woods, you'd be just as puzzled and mystified. And this illustrates the fact that something that is mysterious stops seeming mysterious simply by its accustomed presence. It is strange indeed, for example, that the universe should exist. But very few people are often struck by how strange that is and simply take it for granted. So like we take for granted that a lot of stuff exists, and it's only when something pops out as unusual that we start questioning, how did that get there? But again, do you follow me, that the same type of question could be given even in the case of things that are in no way unusual or out of the ordinary? Okay, so now, he believes that this leads us to the following principle. And before I write the principle, one more little piece of his text. Suppose you found this translucent ball and you're mystified by it. Now, whatever else you might wonder about it, there's one thing that you would not question. You would never say that it appeared there all by itself, or that it doesn't owe its existence to something. You might not have the remotest, faintest idea how it got there, but you would never doubt that there was an explanation. The idea that it might have come from nothing at all, or that it might exist with no explanation, is one that nobody would consider seriously worthy of entertaining. So like, you know, for example, that this sphere didn't just pop out of nothingness, out of thin air. You know that it can't just generate itself out of nothing. So anything that exists has to have some kind of ultimate cause that brought it into existence. And now, based on that whole example and discussion, we get to state this principle, which is kind of the result that follows from the example. So it's called the principle of sufficient reason. So what it says is that in the case of any positive truth, there is some sufficient reason for it. Now, that's the verbatim statement of it. But to be like a little less formal, another way of putting it, which is equivalent, is to say that there is a cause or explanation for any fact. Okay, so that's the principle of sufficient reason. All it's saying is that if something exists, it had to be caused by something else. Something had to explain or cause it to exist. Something explains why it exists, and that is its cause. What about the words positive truth? I don't want that to throw you off at all, so let me quickly explain what that means. A positive truth is that something does exist. And so given that something exists, there has to be a cause for it. A negative truth would be a statement that something does not exist. And that is something that the principle does not apply to. Let me give you a quick example of what I'm talking about. I think you guys have seen my cat, right? Peach. And so I have a cat. She exists. Given that she exists, there has to be some kind of backstory which caused, like what caused her to exist. And we know that in the big picture, it's like the two cat parents of Peach are the ultimate cause, mating and stuff, and birth, that caused her to exist. Same with me and you, right? I exist. So given that I exist, I had to have been caused by something. I can't just pop out of nothing, right? Now the negative truth. So I do not have a goat. Like in my apartment, there's no goat. So we could say that's a negative truth. There's no goat in Vulich's apartment. Now that is something that doesn't have to be explained. Like, why isn't there a goat there? So the non-existence of something doesn't need to have a causal explanation. But if something exists positively, affirmatively, then of course that's something that does have to have an explanation, given that it's something that's real and that does exist. Okay, so are you guys still with me here? Just let me check in on the chat, making sure that all these comments are coming through. You're up to speed on the principle of sufficient reason, yeah? Let me know. Or if you had any questions or anything else, you can let me know that. Okay, so far so good, just checking in. Okay, great guys. So let me just kind of take stock of the argument as far as we've come with it. He starts with this hypothetical example, weird example, but kind of that's the point, that it's unusual. So he says, if you saw an unusual sight like a sphere in the woods, you would trigger a reaction of curiosity, inquiry. How did it get there? At least for a moment. I mean, it'd be a kind of weird person who just saw a sphere in the woods and is like, sphere in the woods, nice, and just keeps walking, without thinking, that's strange. So at least for a temporary little moment of time, you'd have to have the thought. Any normal person would have the thought, why is that there? That's kind of strange. How to get here in the woods? Okay, now on the basis of that example, he then says, if you really think about it, though, the same type of question could be asked of even anything. Whether you're used to it being there or not, of course it has to have an origin if it exists. And that's what leads us into this principle here, principle of sufficient reason. And so yet, once again, if something's true, there had to be a cause or an explanation for it. Okay, great. So now we move to the next stage of the argument. A couple more steps of the argument are left. What he does next is he discusses two different types of truth. Okay, so in logic and in philosophy, we oftentimes describe two types of truths, and this is key to the next part of his argument. So there are two types of truth. Okay, so one of the two types are what are called contingent truths. Compared against, contrasted with necessary truths. So first, the contingent truths at the top. The definition, the idea here is, these are things that are true, but they could have been false under different circumstances. Okay, so things that are true, they are true, but, very important but could have been false in different circumstances than the actual ones that happened. Okay, there's our definition. Now let's try and have a discussion about that with some examples. Look at that, contemplate what it means, and then here, let me ask you to give me some examples. I would like you to tell me some things here in the chat that are contingent truths. Give me some contingent truths. So I'm asking you for examples of things that are true. These are true to fact, reality things, but they didn't need to happen. They could have not happened. They might have happened not at all if the circumstances that played out had played out differently. So who can think of anything that is like that? Something true, but it didn't need to happen. It could have been different, at least possibly. So like, what are some examples you can think of? And we'll just work off of your examples and then have further discussion from there. So yeah. Okay, so you being born, Sydney, that's a very good and kind of almost a little trippy example, and it's a good one, right? So you've been born, and I'm very happy that you're here and that you're with us. But I guess the fact that you were born, of course, might not have happened if your parents never met. You know, your parents have probably told you the story of how they got to know each other and ended up falling in love, whatever, and, you know, gave birth to you. But maybe that wouldn't have happened if they had been born in different places, or if their circumstances leading to their meeting didn't happen, right? Or if they didn't hit it off or something like that. So that's one example. Sebastian, you say history. Good, but I would be a little more specific because there's so many things in history. Maybe you could point one historical event, and that would be an interesting example. But definitely you're on the right track because all the events of history are contingent on the way things played out. So yeah, Brandon, the Holocaust. Yeah, the Holocaust did happen, of course, but I guess it might not have happened if Hitler didn't rise to power in Nazi Germany, or maybe if he had been, if something like maybe he got hit by a bus as a kid or something, you know, like a lot of things could have happened differently that maybe would have prevented the Holocaust. It's a sad fact, but it did happen. It might not have happened, though, under different circumstances. Zoe, I like your example, too. You took a sip of water, but you didn't need to, okay? I can't verify that you did, but I take your word for it. And I guess if you had a different thought, a different decision, or you decided to hesitate, then you might not have had that same sip of water. If this class didn't take place at this specific time, that's another cool example, Angel. I mean, even the fact that you're in this class, right? You might have made a different decision about your schedule, choosing not to do philosophy or do it at some other time in your college career. You might not have even been a student at Chapman, right? Maybe you would have taken an offer from another school or not even wanted to go to college. But I'm glad that you're here, but those are things that are contingent too. It's sunny outside. I don't know where you're exactly at. I'm in Long Beach and it's kind of overcast, but wherever you are, the weather condition that you're having is also subject to circumstance and might have been different if different things had happened. And we could go on and on. There's infinity of examples. The Capitol riots happened, and there's certain things that, you know, if they'd played out differently, then that might not have happened. JFK's assassination, and on and on and on, okay? From the biggest to the smallest details, there's all these contingent truths. So just know that those are things that are true, but we can imagine a situation where it didn't happen, like Tampa Bay Buccaneers just won the Super Bowl. Maybe if the Chiefs had a more prepared offensive line, and they would have been the victory, the winning team. So another contingent truth. Okay, so now we're going to move over here, necessary truths. These are things that are true also, but there's a difference. With a necessary truth, as you can maybe guess by the name, these are things that are true, but that couldn't even possibly be false. Like in no conceivable situation could these things be false, no matter what happens. So these are things that are true and could not possibly be false. Necessary truths, things that are true, and unlike the contingent truths, they have no chance, zero chance of being false. It's literally logically impossible for a necessary truth to be false. So these, I figure, are a little harder for you to advance examples of at first. It's a little bit of a more outside the box kind of thing to think of examples, but maybe you can. Who thinks maybe they could suggest a possible example of a necessary truth? It's okay if it's not a perfect example, but we'll just, you know, get to the right understanding through this discussion. So what do you consider, based on this definition, something that is a necessary truth? Okay, Cordy, all triangles have three sides. That's a great example. I also like Claire's example that 2 + 2 = 4. Let me mention some stuff about those before I talk about McKenna and Brandon's examples here. So necessary truths, yes, the whole realm of math, geometry, trigonometry, all those statements that are true in those fields are necessary truths. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl is something that was subject to chance. It was subject to a probability of happening otherwise. But 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not something that changes depending on the circumstances. It's not like 2 plus 2 is 4 usually, and then on other days when we have different weather or something, that's just not the case. No, it's always true. It's necessarily true. Now, Dennis, this is not correct. No. Chapman was founded is contingent. The fact that Chapman was founded, it might not have been founded. You know, the people who founded it might have chosen to do something else with their life and initiate a different project. Or maybe there would have been no grant given to the land that was used to form the campus. Let's be clear, Dennis, you understand the foundation of Chapman campus is contingent, just like the foundation of the United States or the foundation of any university or even the existence of the whole planet Earth. It's all contingent. But necessary truths, yeah, it's stuff like triangles have 3 sides. The interior angles of the triangle add to 180 degrees. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, McKenna and Brandon, you talk about gravity and the world being round. I understand why you're thinking this because those have to do with physical laws of nature. And you might think that the laws of nature, gravity, entropy, etc., the laws of thermodynamics, that those things can't possibly change. But I've heard it argued that if the initial events of the Big Bang, like the rate of inflation of matter out from the explosion, had been slightly different, then we might have had wildly different physical laws. So you can imagine possible universes where gravity doesn't function as it does here, or where matter doesn't accumulate into spherical shapes in the void of space. But fair enough. I mean, it takes a very, very far-fetched, contrary to fact supposition for those things to even be conceivably false. Okay, guys, so stuff like 2 plus 2 is 4. Each point on the perimeter of a circle is equally far from the center. Logical truths, like any statement of self-identity, like A equals A, is a necessary truth for any A. So like the dog is a dog would be a tautology, and that's necessary truth as well. Okay, so now we come back to the larger argument. There's 2 different types of truths. Contingent truths are things that are true but might not have been. And necessary truths are things that actually have nothing to do with the events of space and time. So the best examples of them are things that are purely formal, like math, logic, geometry, and trigonometry. Okay, so now the principle of sufficient reason that we were just discussing, which says that everything that's true has to have a cause or an explanation. The kind of truths that pertains to are the contingent truths. These contingent truths, since they didn't need to happen, they had to have been caused by some kind of set of factors that led to their happening rather than not. So all the contingent truths depend on something playing out a certain way for their existence. Like, for example, the fact that you exist, and that is contingent. Your existence depends on something else happening in the past, namely your parents conceiving you, and same with them, and on and on. So with contingent truths, since they need to have some kind of reason for having happened instead of not, the principle of sufficient reason applies to them. And that means that whenever there's a contingent truth, there had to be some cause or explanation for it, right? So Buccaneers won, there has to be an explanation or cause for that event. Your birth, my birth, I don't know, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. In each of these cases, there's some kind of prior backstory which leads to that event happening. It doesn't just poof, pop out of nowhere. There's a causal history behind it. Okay, so now we move to the next, and there's only a couple steps of the argument left, so we're almost to the end of this one. The next point that's raised is that the universe, look around, this universe, it clearly exists. That's the truth. That's a fact. The universe exists. The universe, some call it the cosmos, and hence the name of the argument. But anyway, the universe / cosmos exists. Now, that's something that no one can deny. That's something that nobody can possibly deny. I mean, you know the universe exists because here you are and you're within it. So if you didn't think it existed, I don't know what you would think where you are at or what kind of domain surrounds you. But there's clearly the universe. So since this is a truth, here's my question for you. Which kind of truth do you think this would be classified as, according to the author and those that promote this argument? The fact that the universe exists, is this contingent or is it necessary? Based on what your judgment is. What do you think on that? The universe exists. So, good, Sydney, you're saying contingent. And I don't know if Other responses are given. Yeah, Cordy contingent, Kylie contingent. Great. That is the consensus view, and that is exactly what he's saying in this paper as well. The fact that the universe exists is contingent, so that means that although there's a universe, and that's clear, there might not have been. It's possible to imagine the universe never having existed. And I think this is something that whether you are a devout follower of religion or if you're a skeptic and an atheist, either way you go, it seems like this is common ground, that the universe is contingent. Because if you are not really into the religious hypothesis of creation, then you believe in the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is contingent, because if it didn't, the existence of the universe based on the Big Bang is contingent. Because if the Big Bang didn't happen, then there wouldn't have been the universe. If you believe in the theory of creationism, then once again it's contingent, because on that theory, God's the creator, and that's why the universe is here, rather than the Big Bang. But if God is the creator, then he might not have had the will to create the universe, or he could have chosen not to do so, right? He's not forced to act, he's God. So whether it's God the creator or the Big Bang, it seems like universally everyone seems to agree that the universe is contingent. So if the universe is contingent, as the author is arguing, and which seems somewhat supported by common sense, then the principle of sufficient reason says what? That the universe being contingent has to have a what? Let me know in the chat what you think I'm hinting at here. Since the universe exists and that is contingent, then according to the principle of sufficient reason, there has to be what? A cause, exactly. There must be a cause or an explanation of the universe. So now there's only this one left over very big question. If the universe has to have a cause, if there has to be an explanation or a cause for the universe, what could it possibly be? What could possibly be the cause of the whole universe? Now, that's a big question, because we're not just asking what's the cause of some specific thing in the universe. If I ask what's the cause of me, okay, it's my parents. But my parents are another thing within the universe. So the question of what could cause the entire thing is a much more difficult question, because you can't just point to some other thing that's a part of it. At least let's explain that, okay? So take a look at this diagram. I'm just drawing a circle and I'm labeling it with the letter U. Let's pretend that this designates and stands for the whole universe. So that's the universe and everything within it. Milky Way, galaxy, Crab Nebula, planet Earth, all of human history. It's all within the universe. Okay. So now, one question. The universe, they say, has to have a cause. If it does, could the universe be its own cause? Could something that is a part of the universe, or even just something within the universe, could that possibly be the cause of the universe? Let's see. Consider the question and see if you can give your answer to me. And the question again is this. Could somehow the universe cause itself to exist? Is that possible? Yes or no? Could this be its own source? Dennis, you're asking, so a creator, God, or a different creator for different religions, regardless of any religion, is all contingent, right? No, Dennis, no. Hold that thought. I'll come right back to you. But God, the creator, is not contingent. But it takes a moment for me to explain why. So let's hold that thought. Yeah, okay, Cordy, exactly, and Angel, same. The universe cannot cause itself to exist. Isn't that obvious to us? Nothing can cause itself to exist if it's contingent. Okay, because why is it impossible for something to cause itself to exist? Because if it causes itself, then it has to already exist to be the cause. The universe, we are saying, is the effect from some cause. But it can't be that something is both the cause and the effect of itself. Let me give you the question and think about it in a slightly different example. Can somebody give birth to themselves? Isn't that obvious? No. It's clearly an absurd thing to even consider. If something were to give birth to itself, we're talking nonsense, because that thing would have to already be there to give the birth to the thing that it is, which makes no sense. It would have to already have existed before its birth. This doesn't make sense. So this kind of scenario of the universe or something of the universe reaching back to cause itself is clearly a non-starter, clearly a contradiction. And so that's one possibility that we can rule out. The universe cannot be its own cause, because if it were, it would have had to already exist before itself. And now we're just talking gibberish. So that won't work. Here's another possibility to consider. And this kind of gets touches on your question, Dennis. So let's see what we say. Suppose that the universe is not then caused by something within. So it has to be caused by something totally separate and outside of it. I'm drawing an arrow here, and let's say this arrow represents causation. From the cause to the effect, pointed towards the universe, this is the effect. So suppose that the cause of the universe is this, but suppose that it's something which is contingent. That's why I've labeled it with the letter C there, okay? Now focus on this question and think about the answer. Question, could something which is itself contingent be the cause of the universe? Would that be a better explanation than the first, which says it's self-caused? That doesn't seem to be possible. Could something contingent cause the universe to exist? What do you say? Think about it, and then let me know what you think. Could some contingent being, cause our universe? Let me know. Just a yes or no, but it's based on what you have to have a judgment on it that's based on a reason. So why or why not? Could something contingent be the cause of the universe? Sydney, now you say yes, but, and I like how you've added to that because this is the problem. Yes, but there would need to be an explanation for that being. But that point that you raised there at the second part of your sentence, that's actually why the correct answer is no. Because look, if this thing is contingent, which causes the universe, based on the principle of sufficient reason, this would have to also have a cause, right? Because something contingent can't be the first thing that exists. Anything that's contingent depends on something else for its existence. Just like how you were born, you come from something that's before you. So if something contingent causes the universe, then this is not independently existing. It depends on a prior cause for its existence. So if the cause of the universe is contingent, then the cause has a cause. And if the cause of the cause is contingent, then this just leads to what's called an infinite regress. So infinity symbol here. And according to those who promote this argument, it is not possible for there to be an infinite regress of causes that just go back and back to infinity without ever having one initial origin. So this also is not possible. An infinite regress of causes is impossible. So this is also ruled out. This picture of the universe is the result of something that's the result of something else, and on and on and on to infinity. This also never gets us to an explanation of why the entire sequence exists in the first place. Just saying there's an infinite sequence of causes, it has no foundations then. So that also doesn't help to explain the cause of the universe. Now look at the comments really fast. McKenna, if everything has a cause, using this principle, and in at least the Christian religion, God lives outside of the universe, is this an argument against the existence of God? 100% no. This is an argument that God exists. The existence of the infinite regress is ruled out. So the conclusion that is reached is that the cause of the universe is not contingent. It is not contingent. Sorry, McKenna, you're misunderstanding because I think you've jumped the gun before we reach the end. We're just ruling out other explanations of what the cause of the universe could be. This is totally in line with religion because what he's saying is, no, it's not that the cause is contingent. So let's come to the right answer. We'll come back to your question there, Cordy. Is the infinite regress impossible? One critic of the argument mentions maybe it's not impossible, and that's one way of trying to resist the argument. But look, if this picture is also not viable because an infinite regress is impossible, then the only possible cause of the universe has to be something outside of it, but not something contingent. So if it's not something contingent, what would be the nature of this cause of the universe? The only way to stop it from being an infinite regress of causes is if the first cause is not contingent, but is rather what? Oh yeah, not to worry, Cordy. Why is it that an infinite regress is impossible? Well, because it doesn't have an initiation. It doesn't start anywhere. An infinite regress just goes back and back and never ever has an ultimate origin. So it has to be a necessary truth. That is the cause of the universe. That's why I'm labeling it here with the letter N. This is the only possible explanation that avoids the infinite regress, which is thought to be an impossible scenario. So this is a necessary being. And now, hopefully, McKenna, you'll understand. A necessary being does not depend on anything else. A necessary being is independent. Everything else depends on God, but God doesn't depend on any prior cause for his own existence. Okay, so this is the only viable explanation for how our contingent universe could have existed. It can't cause itself, and it can't be caused by a sequence of contingencies that never has a beginning. So wherever the causal story reaches the very first link in the chain of events, that first member has to be something that doesn't depend on anything else. Because let's be all clear, something contingent could not be the first thing, because something contingent depends on something else that has caused it to exist. So wherever the initiation of all causation begins, it starts with a necessary being, something which everything depends on, but which itself does not depend on anything else. And that necessary being is the creator God, the thing that causes the universe and all other beings to exist, but which itself is entirely independent and exists through its own nature without having any cause. Okay, so, Sebastian, is God not also a being which made himself exist, since nothing caused God's existence either? Well, God exists through his own nature, is the way that people who advance the argument put it. God, it's not that he causes himself to exist, because that does have some of the same absurdities as saying that anything is its own cause, but rather he just ultimately exists. He's uncaused, he's ultimate. God is just there forever and for all eternity. He can't be destroyed nor created. And so God is this eternal, imperishable being from which everything else issues and everything follows from. I know that might not be 100% satisfying because you're still thinking in cause and effect terms. But I guess with a necessary being, we're being asked to no longer think of the common concept of cause and effect. A necessary being exists ultimately and without any prior origin or backstory. Many people find that to be a flaw in the argument, though, because the argument sometimes seems like it wants to emphasize two things that are not in line with each other. One thing it's emphasizing is that the universe must have a cause. It can't just be there for no reason. But then with God, it seems like no problem that there's no reason. That's just a necessary being. So it's a fundamentally different kind of being. So we don't have to worry about the fact that it is uncaused and just sort of self-standing and independent. Cordy, it reminds me of Thomas Aquinas' first mover argument. Well, it is that same argument, Cordy. I mean, you know it's not a different argument. Aristotle's argument is the argument for the cosmological argument of God's existence. So Aristotle made this argument, and then it was appropriated by Thomas Aquinas in the medieval period. Thomas Aquinas is a saint in the Christian church, so he makes the exact same argument, yes. It is 500 years prior to this. But the argument I told you, the cosmological argument, is thousands of years old. It goes back further even than the genesis of the dawn of Western civilization and Greek culture. You can find versions of it written in Hindu texts and stuff, and other world religions, even that predate this. So I was very clear that Richard Taylor is not the original inventor of the argument. He's a commentator on it. And so he's just commenting on it in the year 1963. But it existed for thousands of years before him. And it relies on the same understanding, yes, that there must be some first mover. God is the first mover, the necessary being. But Cordy, I want you to understand, don't misconceive this as a different argument. Like if you're thinking, oh, they're similar. This one says something that the other one says. They're identical. It's the same argument. There's just two authors talking about the same argument. Okay, very good. Yes. So that's the end of this argument. Let me read some things from the book, and you can see how he put it. So he says, okay, so from the principle of sufficient reason, it's on page 26, it follows that there must be a reason not only for the existence of everything in the universe, but for the universe itself. Meaning by the universe, everything that ever exists except for God. This principle does not imply that there must be a purpose or goal for everything. It only implies that there must be some cause or explanation for everything. Now, going on a little further, he says, if, as seems clearly implied by the principle of sufficient reason, as is page 28, there must be a reason for the existence of heaven and earth, for the universe, then that reason must be found either inside the universe or outside of it. in something that is literally within or without the universe. Now, if we suppose that the universe, the totality of all things, contains within itself the reason for its existence, then we would be saying that it is a necessary being. This is implausible, however, because we find nothing about the universe to suggest that it exists through its own nature. We find, on the contrary, ever so many things to suggest that it does not. For in the first place, anything that exists by its very nature would be eternal and indestructible. But nothing in the universe seems like this, because concerning anything in it, we can perfectly think of it as being annihilated or never having existed in the first place. Some things are very old, like the moon or the stars and planets, but we can clearly imagine a case in which they no longer exist, or in which at some prior time they did not exist. So continuing from there on page 29, it would seem then that the universe is contingent, and thus depends on something else for its existence, if it depends on anything at all. And it must depend on something, because otherwise there would be no reason why it exists in the first place. So, if it doesn't exist by its own nature, then it either depends for its existence on something else, which depends for its existence on something else, or it derives its existence from something that is necessary and imperishable, and is the creator of heaven and earth. The first alternative, the infinite regress, is impossible, because it does not give a sufficient reason why the whole series exists in the first place. Instead of giving a reason why any universe should exist, it refuses to give a reason and simply pushes us to the next contingent cause in the series. Ultimately, then, it would seem that the universe, the totality of all things, must depend on something that is necessary and imperishable, and that accordingly exists not by depending on anything else, but through its own nature. And so that's, the author's statements that kind of align with the presentation here in the meeting. Cordy, no, good, yes, not to worry. I just wanted to be clear, because I can sometimes, you have a very precise understanding of this, I guess, but I don't want any student to be confused or see something in the comments that throws them off. So sometimes I just have to be corrected, but it's not a problem. Okay, cosmological argument, guys. So now we've added another one to our little growing roster of classical arguments for God's existence. We've got the ontological argument, which is just based on a definition of God as the perfect being. And now we have the cosmological argument. In my view, I like the cosmological argument better. This is the one that really gives me the most serious theological consideration. If I was wanting to try and persuade anybody that God exists, a hardcore atheist, I would make this appeal to them, and I think it would be the most effective way of trying to get them to think about how the universe could have existed. Because everyone knows there's a relationship of cause and effect. We see it every day. We ourselves are the product of such processes as cause and effect. So applying the same principles to the whole universe, it does lead us into these sort of reflections, I think. Okay, well, there's another argument for God's existence that we want to at least try and start talking about. And on Friday, we'll be able to finish that and catch up as much as possible. So there's this trio of big classic arguments for God's existence, and they're kind of the big three, and these are the first three that are in our book. That's why we're doing them first. Ontological, cosmological, and then the argument from design. The argument from design is sometimes known by a couple of other labels. It sometimes is referred to as the argument from intelligent design. I've heard that said in the modern day. It's also sometimes called, a little more technical, the teleological argument. So I don't necessarily want to make you remember that big complicated word, but it does rhyme with ontological and cosmological. So I like the fact that they kind of have that link. Anyway, though, it's the argument from design, at least most conventionally referred to that way. Now, this is another argument that has a pretty ancient history, but we are looking at a version of it from William Paley, who's a British philosopher of the 18th and just barely 19th century. He lived from 1743 until 1805. And he wrote a book in 1804, which now we're going to study some parts of it, and that's what's in our textbook, The Argument from Design. William Paley was an Anglican priest, so he's a priest in the Christian Church of England. Therefore, he's a devout believer, but he doesn't want to just go off of faith alone. He thinks that there can be a rational argument to persuade that God exists, and so he tries to put it forward in this article that he wrote. Okay, so just letting you know the name of the article and topic, the author that we're looking at, his lifespan, and the date of publication. So that's just to set the stage. Now, though, I'll just try and at least, with a few minutes we have left in class, I'll at least present the hypothetical scenario that he starts the paper with. So once again, for better or worse, and I hope it's not too frustrating, but there's a hypothetical scenario that starts his paper off. And as often in philosophy, these scenarios are given to merely focus your mind on a key concept or a principle as we lay out an argument. So imagine a person, ironically, it's a coincidence here, but another case where someone's walking in the woods. But in this version of our scenario, what you find on the forest floor is a watch, like the watch that's on my wrist here. Okay, so you see a watch sitting there on the forest floor. And okay, if you actually did find such a thing there, one thing you would know for sure about the origin of the watch, where it came from, how it got started in the universe, there's only really one way for a watch to come into being. And what is that? Like you already know, a watch, literally like a wristwatch, there's no other way for it to ever exist except for what? What has to happen for a watch to exist? What's the only possible cause or origin of a watch? Good, a watchmaker. It cannot be a random process that generates a watch. Do you understand me? Like, you couldn't just have chance events in nature and a watch is the result of that. There's no way that like a hurricane, a tornado, kick up a bunch of dust and silica, and then a lightning bolt hits them in midair, and somehow that fuses the elements together, and just by chance, there's a watch at the end sitting there on the floor of the forest. There's no way a watch could ever be produced in that way. So it has to take a watchmaker. But I have a follow-up question. You're correct, Angel, and anyone else who was thinking the same thing, that it has to be a watchmaker, an intelligent being. It has to be an intelligent being that creates a watch. It takes an architect. It takes a designer. It takes a guiding hand for it to happen. But why, though, is that obvious? One last question, and we can pick up with this when we resume on Friday. But what makes it so obvious to us that the watch definitely had to have a watchmaker, and there's no other way it could have ever been constructed? What is it about the nature of such a watch? Like, what's the reason behind you saying it had to have a maker, an intelligent designer? What is it about watches that makes that obvious? Well, you say it doesn't appear out of thin air. I know, Olga, but how do you know? Like, what reason do you have for that being clear? Why is it so obvious that they don't appear out of thin air? Why? What about it? Like, if a little kid's asking you, why don't they appear out of thin air? I don't know. What's the reason that that's not, that you know that they don't? Or like, what is it about the watch that makes it so evident and common sense obvious that it had to have an intelligent designer? Some things do appear out of thin air. I mean, I don't know, like air appears out of thin air, right? So like, what is different about the watch than literally just air blowing around? You got nothing for me? You're like, I don't know, it's a watch. What do you want? It's a watch. That's how I know it's made by somebody. But you got to say more. You got to try harder. You got to say, what is it about the watch, though, that makes this an obvious fact? Okay, Cordy. There are design features and functional reasons that reflect creative intelligence. And you say there's more than one of the same. But Sydney, that's not right. I mean, there's a bunch of bacteria everywhere, but I don't know if you'd say those were created by a person, or there's rocks all over, in the forest, and they don't strike you as having been the result of an intelligent process, at least not necessarily so. So it's really Cordy's reason, to be honest with you guys. It's because the watch obviously performs a function of telling time. It's not just a random thing like a rock or a piece of moss. It's something that tells time. And so all the parts of the watch have to be just so carefully put together in order for it to produce this time-telling function. Okay, so it's the complexity of the assembly of its parts, and also the fact that it performs a specific function. So it has to be that some intelligent force has the intention of building a timepiece that can produce the timekeeping function. And it also takes intelligent activity to compile all the parts and assemble them in the right order so that it will tell time. So obviously, right, a watch can't just fall out of the sky. A watch can't just happen through random or luck, chance events. It has to be deliberately made through an intentional process by something that's intelligent. Now we're going to continue on this theme next time. We're going to complete the argument from design. But just to give you a little preview of where we're headed in this, basically he's going to say that the watch is so sophisticated, complex, and functional that it has to have a maker, and he hopes that's obvious to all of us. He uses the example of the watch, but you could use any other technologically sophisticated thing, a computer, a phone. He's writing in 1804, though, so he gives this watch as his example. That leads him to this principle that if something has complexity and design, it has to have an intelligent maker. If it has a function and a purpose and some complexity, it has to have an intelligent designer. So there's also stuff in nature then that he will mention as an analogy, like the eyes that you can see with. They have the function of vision, and there's all kinds of complexity of the biological components that allow vision to happen. So he says if a watch could not happen except through intelligent design, then no way could the things in nature have happened without intelligent design, because they're even more complicated and they're even more impressive in their function than the watch was. So you can't say that the watch has to have a maker, but then like living organisms with eyes, ears, nose, the wings of the bird, the digestive system, photosynthesis, these processes of nature surpass the watch in their function and their complexity. So they must have had an intelligent designer as well, and that would be God. But there's more to fill in details. So I guess for now anyways, I'll let you guys go. But thanks again for being back at the meeting. Sorry for our little connection issue on Monday, but hopefully now we can see that that is definitely a rare and unusual occurrence. I don't think it's likely to recur. But I appreciate you guys again, and take care. Let me know by hitting the like button or just saying goodbye that you're still with me and that we got through the meeting. And then we'll all be good to go for today. Thank you guys. Okay, good. Thanks a lot. I'll see you then next time. So have a great couple of days. And if you need anything through email, let me know. I'm going to send the first essay prompts this weekend, and we will talk about them on Monday. But don't worry too much. You'll have 2 weeks to work on them starting on Monday. But that's coming up, so just kind of keeping your mind on the calendar too. Okay, guys, have a great one then. And until next time, I'll see you then.